Good morning, Moms and Master Books. Hope you're having a fantastic week so far. Hey, today we've got a fun topic. We're going to deal with the flip side of motivation. What to do when the fun, energized, all that doesn't work and the kid is just shutting down. So we're going to talk about that. But a couple of things first. Be sure to comment for a chance to earn 2,500 reward points. We're going to pick one comment today, and we will put 2,500 reward points into that account. So we're excited for that. The second thing that I would like to do, and I'll mention it up front, there's going to be a coupon code that we will announce. The coupon code is RESET, R-E-S-E-T. It's for a free digital copy of Reset for Parents. I'm going to put a link in. I'm going to talk a little bit about this book today, but highly encourage you to download the free copy and take a look at it. Just a heads up, this is also going to be in the flash sale next Tuesday. So you could, if you want to get the free copy, check it out, look at it, and then if you want to buy the physical copy, it'll be in the flash sale next week, okay? Because I think the content in this, if you're watching this video, will be helpful for you. Okay, one last thing. So excited. Somebody just handed me the new copy of the Master Books Curriculum Catalog, which I know I've already gone through, but that was a printed off version. This is actually from the printer. This is the copy that you guys are going to be getting soon. If you've ordered from us in the past or you're on the mailing list, you're going to get this. It just came out of printer, so within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I would expect that they'll be mailing. And then anybody who didn't get it, we're going to put a link up so people can actually request it. But I love this catalog was actually done on a little bit nicer paper. It's a matte finish, so you can write in it and make notes. Just some really cool stuff. And the pictures are awesome. One of my favorite pictures in this book, all of them are awesome, the kids. But I love that picture of the little girl jumping outside the box, because that's what we want with education, that you think outside the box, that your kids come outside the box, that they learn for a lifetime. So this is on its way. I'm excited about that. Okay, so let's get started. The flip side of motivation. After you've done everything possible to help your student, right? You've worked hard to make it exciting. You've bought all the Master Books curriculum, and they just have those shutdown moments. They're not doing it. They don't get it. There's different characteristics that we're going to talk about, but you've basically done everything you can. We're going to talk about that. In motivation, we have the carrot, right? Which is, if you think of the mule or the ox pulling, I guess it'd be a mule, pulling the cart. You have the carrot, which they're chasing, and they pull the cart because of that. That would be positive motivation. And then sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes the reward isn't big enough, so to speak, and they need a little extra push from behind. I'm going to refrain from saying whip throughout this, because that's not necessarily the point of this, and there just needs to be a push. So we have the pull of the carrot and we have the push from behind to be an encouragement. So what we're talking about today is more the push than the reward that we talked about last week. So I would also like to say that as I've grown older, I talked about this a little bit with Kristen last night as well. As we've grown older, I think we've gotten a little bit better at determining when to push and when we just need to make sure that the reward is appropriate and the challenge is doable, and that what hills we really want to die on. I think when we were younger and had a lot more energy, we were probably willing to die on a lot more hills, so to speak. If you're familiar with that, the military, the hill is the high ground, and what hills you take strategically helped you in positioning yourself in a battlefield. And so some hills we're willing to take because they gave you a strategic advantage. Other hills weren't worth taking, and lives would get lost because they took hills that really weren't worth anything. So I think as you get more seasoned, as your kids get older and you get more seasoned, you begin to realize that there are some hills that just aren't worth dying for. And then there are other hills that are, if we lose this hill, we lose the battle. So in saying that, I also feel that it's important to say that sometimes we have to check what we've learned from our parents or those around us, and just ask, is this right? Is this good? I don't have a lot of experience with horses, but I did have a horse that had severe behavioral issues. And so it helped me understand. And there were two modes of training. We grew up in a community where there were Amish, and the way that they would break a horse was essentially to break the horse's spirit. And so that horse would teach respect and it would submit. And they would have compliance from that. Some of the training methods where they would tie it up, they would tie it to cans and they would spook it and scare it, and it would fight and wrestle until eventually it just gave up. And that's one way to train a horse. The other way of training the horse, if you remember Monty Roberts, he was the horse whisperer. They would run the horse a little bit. They would use the psychology that horses use in a whatever a horse pack is. Is it a herd? I don't know. What is that? I don't know. All right. Whatever it is that all those horses do when they're all together, I think it'd be a herd. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. So the horse would join up to the trainer and would be motivated like it would be part of that herd. So with parenting, I think my initial way of parenting was, I will break this child's spirit. I will teach them respect. And it was a much harsher way. My poor three oldest. And as I've gotten farther along, maybe I'm too soft in some cases, but I'm much different in that I realize I have learned some lessons along the way. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But just be willing to question yourself, like, is what we're talking about, are these hills that we are willing to die on, are they important? And also, is my style of parenting, is it the most appropriate? Is it actually effective? And is it helping to accomplish the goal and the trust that was necessary versus maybe what I was learned or experienced as a child, which was, you will respect me through fear, as opposed to coming to respect, a mutual respect. And there's a difference. Okay. So for this one, we're going to talk about the push. Now, we get what we lead. I say that every time. So I think the first thing I need to do is I need to check myself. So in any situation like this, I need to first ask, what are the goals? Do I know what the goals that I want to accomplish with my children are? So for me, I want my children to be successful in life. I want them to be able to achieve all that God has set before them and to do it successfully. So yes, I want them to have the academic skills to do that. I want them to have the social skills to do that. And I want them to have the spiritual skills to follow the leading of the Lord, to trust in Him, and to accomplish all that He has for them. So that's my goal. I want my children to succeed in life. And that looks different for each child, depending on what the Lord calls them to. But I believe that I can equip them with the general skills needed to accomplish almost anything. They can acquire more skills as they go. So that's my goal. In everything I look at, I want to look at, is this helping to achieve my goals? What we're experiencing today with this little fit of anger or rebellion or maybe just laziness, is this helping achieve the goal when I look at 10, 20, 30 years from now, when I want them to be successful? If not, then I need to adjust that. So number one for me is to make sure that I've defined my goals. If I can't explain my goals to my children, I certainly shouldn't expect them to want to accomplish it. And I think that that's important for us. Why do you need to learn math? It's important for me as an educator to know why it's important to learn math. So when my kids ask, I can explain that. Why it's important to follow the Lord. Why it's important to stay committed to reading his word and putting his word into my mind. These things, if I can't explain them, I certainly can't expect anybody under me, my children, my family, those that the Lord has under me, I can't expect that from them. So I have to be willing to go there first. So know my goals. Number 2, a big one for us parents. Do not personalize this. So often, and this was a little bit of my upbringing, was my behavior was a reflection on my parents' behavior. And if I'm misbehaving, that would mean that they were bad parents. And we've all kind of felt that in the past. And sometimes it is because I'm lacking as a parent, but sometimes it's just because children are foolish and they do foolish things, and that's what happens. I was certainly not a model child, and my dad pastored, and he made it very clear to the church that they were not to judge his children, that they had room as children to be children and room for growth. And so we had dark glasses. We tinted our glasses. I had long hair. We played it was the 80s, so we played in a band that had a lot of loud music with big amplifiers and that type of thing. But he gave us freedom to be children. Now our spiritual condition was different. He wanted our hearts to pursue God, but we had a lot of freedom in that. And he could do that without personalizing it. Even though I looked like I belonged in a heavy metal band and he was pastoring a church, he didn't personalize that. He gave me room to be that. So be careful today when your kids are acting out or they're misbehaving or they're refusing to do their schoolwork that you spent so much time laboring to do that. Don't personalize that and make it about you. Separate yourself from that and keep yourself objective and say, you know what, this is about them. This is about me parenting and discipling and training them for the goals that God has for them. And so rather than me getting upset because they're upset, I'm going to step back and I'm going to say objective in this. Good brain versus bad brain. Good brain allows me to ask good questions, think objectively, and find answers. Bad brain is when I go emotional. When I make decisions based on an emotional state, they're angry, now I'm angry, and I'm going to react out of anger back to them. That's a bad brain spot. My goal in life is to stay in good brain as much of the time as I can, experience the emotions, but not go to bad brain. In bad brain, you know it because you can feel it, like right here, right? When somebody rubs you wrong or digs in you, or your kids do it, or your husband or wife does it, you feel that right here. And then there's a hormone, a cortisol dump from here, and you feel the tension all through your chest. It's just like, that actually leaves, it's a cortisol hangover that you'll feel in your body for about 3 to 4 hours. So when you allow your student to bring you to the place where you've gone into bad brain, and you can't even, when you go to bad brain, it essentially cuts off the thinking portion of your brain. So the ability to make good decisions and those type of things, you almost can't do that when you're in that bad brain state. So staying in good brain is really important, not personalizing it and saying, okay, so this happened. My kid is refusing to do their schoolwork. They've got their arms crossed and they're unhappy. Okay, so how do we deal with this? This isn't about my failure as a teacher. This isn't about the fact that the curriculum that I'm excited about, they're not. Let's look at this. How do we solve this? And moving forward from that. Number 3 would be don't panic, right? Parenting is a long process. And sometimes we don't even see the fruits of that until they're adults and begin making decisions on their own, have children of their own. So I don't need 100% compliance, 100% happiness overnight. We eat the elephant one bite at a time. And today I can address this situation. I can begin moving things forward. I can begin developing tactics that help me accomplish the goals that we have, but I don't have to do it all today. They don't have to be sitting at their desk, unhappy with their arms crossed, and suddenly I need them to be celebrating, doing the happy dance, blowing the horns and saying, I love school. That just doesn't have to happen in one day. This is a journey. And so don't panic because your kid is acting this way. Relax, don't personalize it, step back, say, all right, how do we get from here to here? No problems. The fourth, when I'm examining myself, is to say, do I have empathy? Okay. The other day, I had a not so good dad moment when I went to pick up my kid and he was running around the church like an animal, and I was embarrassed because I did personalize it and I went to bad brain. And I'm reminded of the time that my mom came to pick me up at it was a vacation Bible school, probably the first day. I had been invited but never been to this church before, and I felt that they were in theological error. Of course, I was wrong, but I refused to submit to the teacher because of what she was teaching. I was not a good kid. The teacher met my mom at the front door and said, please don't ever bring him back to this building. And so I was ejected, expelled from Vacation Bible School. And I can remember the horror on my mom's face as the teacher was explaining that to her. If I keep perspective that I was that as a child, and I look at my children being children, and I see how awesome I have grown as a person, then it helps me to know that my son, who is just like me, will also grow to be an awesome individual as well. And maybe I can even, in my wisdom, help him not have to go through some of the things I did as a student. Okay? So empathy is necessary. Okay. So I have a person that I admire. He is Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu was a warrior. He wrote a book called The Art of War. I'm going to be delicate because I know kids are watching. He wrote a book called The Art of War. And Sun Tzu needed to convince the emperor that he was a brilliant strategist when it came to the art of military warfare. And the emperor said, I'm not going to give you command of my army. I'm not going to do it. Well, Sun Tzu persisted, and he convinced the emperor to let him make the emperor's wives a fighting unit. If he could make the emperor's wives a fighting unit, surely the emperor would know that he could command all the armies. Well, the emperor knew that his wives were not warriors, and they could not be trained to be warriors, so he gave Sun Tzu the opportunity. So Sun Tzu took the emperor's 50 wives and he lined them up in a unit, and he gave them orders and said, this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to give you the command, and when I say command, you're all going to march. And so lined them all up, stood in front while the emperor watched with his mighty men, stood and watched, and Sun Tzu said, march. And the wives giggled and laughed and just thought it was hilarious that he wanted them to march. So Sun Tzu said, obviously, if I've explained something to you and you didn't get it, I'm going to assume the first time it was because I wasn't clear in explaining myself. And so I'm going to assess myself. I'm going to re-explain it in a way that will help you. And then beyond that, I'm going to expect you to do it. So Sun Tzu explained to them again what he expected, took responsibility, explained it to them again. He stood in front of them and he said, okay, march. Again, they laughed, they giggled, they thought it was hilarious that he would expect something like this of him. Sun Tzu swiftly pulled out his sword. He beheaded 2 of the wives and said, if I've explained it once, I assume responsibility. If I explain a second time, I assume you don't know, or you're just choosing not to listen. And so he issued discipline to now the 48 wives. The 48 wives then, when he said march, they marched. Now the emperor was very dismayed because he had lost 2 wives, but he had to admit that Sun Tzu certainly did know how to make anybody into a fighting unit. I've used that story. One of the best times I used that story, I was asked to babysit the neighbors' teenagers, and I had asked for certain things to be done, and they refused to do it. And so upon that, I sat them down at the table. I told them the story of son 2 and how he said the first time, I assume that I didn't do a good job explaining. I said, and so why we're here today is because I'm going to assume I didn't do a good job of explaining my expectations. So let me explain it again so that you fully understand what I'm expecting, knowing what the consequences are. And they got the moral of the story, that this time, this was their grace time. This was the time that I was going to thoroughly explain everything I expected, and that now it was expected of them, or there would be consequences. Okay? This is the part that we're talking about. It's the consequences. And we have to first look at, what are we dealing with when our children have an attitude? Is it laziness? Is it just they're just being lazy? And honestly, we all are a touch lazy. Our brains are wired that once we learn something, we don't like learning something new. If you think about the brain like walking through a field of grass, once there's a path, who wants to go walk through the high grass again? Get covered in bugs and wet and all the stuff, covered in ticks. If there's a path, and the wider the path, if it's a paved path, who wants to go and have to learn something new? So the brain is designed to follow established paths, not to learn new paths easily. It just goes right back into the ruts, into the paths. So when we're asking a student to learn something, it's very easy for them to be lazy and not want to learn something new if there isn't a strong motivation. So it could be laziness. It could be that they're not interested in the topic and they just don't care. And I care about it, but they don't. So that could be one thing. The other could be too hard. If you have a student that's very bright, things come easy for, sometimes learning to work through a challenge that's difficult is the reason that they're shutting down. Defiance and rebellion, that's a character issue. And that is certainly something that we're going to talk about. The other is anger or unforgiveness that can come out, and we'll talk about that as well. So those are the ones that I'm going to address. 2 books that I highly recommend as parents you get. Pitching a Fit by Israel and Brooke Wayne. They just had their, I believe, 10th child, and love them dearly as a couple. And then Reset for Parents. The digital copy of this on masterbooks.com, if you use coupon code RESET, RESET, you can get this for free today. And kind of a switch for me, I saw Todd speak at a mega conference for Answers in Genesis, and he introduced me to the concept of my children are little sinners. They live in a fallen and sin-filled world, and they're little sinners just like you. In the moment he said that, and I realized, yeah, they're behaving just like I do. And the things that I'm expecting from them, I can barely do myself. And it gave me a lot more empathy. It gave me a way to teach my children how to repent, ask for forgiveness, and move forward, but to do it in a healthier way rather than, you will fear me, you will do this just because. So again, this Reset, I'm going to put a link to the book in the comments. If somebody's watching wants to grab that link and put it in, I'd appreciate that too, because highly recommend you reading this. Then next week in the flash sale, you'll be able to get this for like $1.99 if you want the physical copy as well. So I recommend this when we're talking about this topic. Okay, again, make sure you comment. 25 chance to have 2,500 reward points added to your account. It's $25 worth of buying power. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, are they lazy, not interested, too hard, defiant, or is there anger? The first question I want to ask is, what does this look like in 20 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? What does this behavior that they're exhibiting today look like in the future? If they're lazy, what does their life look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? If they don't begin to learn how to have some self-control, some self-discipline to get things done? What does it look like if they're defiant and rebellious in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years? what does it look like if they're full of anger and unforgiveness in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years? And so by looking into the future, it helps me also determine a solution for today. So the question I want to ask is, if my student is lazy, and I see that in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, it's going to cause them, their future spouse, their children, all those in their community to suffer as well, can I create a real-world simulation today that would help them understand and begin to train them to come out of this condition, so that 10, 20, and 30 years, they have a better understanding of the impacts in their own life and the impact in those around them. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is creating kind of a real-world simulation of what this looks like. Okay, so let's say we're not interested. There's a topic that we're just not interested in. Why do I have to do math? I could care less. I don't like math. You know, you're not good at math, so why should I be good at math? Okay, to that, we've made it as fun as possible. We bought math lessons for a living education. We bought balloons for you. We celebrated. We posted your picture on Moms and Master Books, and you're still sitting here and you're just not interested and you're not excited. Well, here's what I say to that student. It's time to suck it up, Buttercup. 50% of life at best is interesting. The other 50% of life isn't that interesting. I love having babies. I hate changing their diapers. I'm not interested in changing their diapers. But if I don't change the diaper of that baby, their life just isn't going to be that. The quality of that baby's life isn't going to be there. And I'm not going to enjoy that baby either. So I have to learn to do the things that I don't necessarily enjoy doing, so that I can have the things that I do enjoy doing and that I am interested in doing. Right? So sometimes life is about having to do the things we're not necessarily interested in to be able to do the things we are interested in, which then follows along with laziness. If I'm lazy, what does the Bible say about the man who was unwilling to work? 2 Thessalonians 3:10. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, "The one who is unwilling to work shall not eat." Okay, so I remember when a man who had a number of kids told me this, and it was remarkable to me, because you know what, that's life, right? I enjoy driving a nice vehicle, but if I'm not willing to put the effort into it, if I'm lazy, I'm not going to drive a nice vehicle. And I'm going to have to be humiliated by the vehicle I drive when I'm broken down on the side of the road, or when I need to go somewhere and it doesn't start. That's what life looks like 10, 20, or 30 years. If I don't have the discipline, if I don't have the ability to push through the things that don't interest me, that I'm just being lazy with, then I don't deserve to have those things that satisfy me. Same in my marriage. If I'm lazy in my marriage and I'm not willing to work to be a better spouse and to show my spouse the respect and love that she deserves, I don't necessarily deserve to be fed from that relationship. So I'm going to change it a little bit from, I'm not advocating that we don't feed our children, but what I'm advocating is that if you don't work, you don't eat. If you don't invest in the things that interest you and are uninteresting, you should not reap the reward of what that life offers. So if your student is not investing, if they're not doing their chores, if they're not doing their schoolwork, if they're not pushing through those things and challenging themselves, I think it's all right to start removing from their life things that they appreciate, like video games, television time, trips out to see the real world, those types of things. And you begin training them that, listen, if you're lazy in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, when you're 25 or 35 and you're too lazy to get up and go out and mow the lawn, and the house looks like garbage, and they come and start issuing citations and charging you money, you're not going to be rewarded for that. You're going to have to experience what we would experience as adults. So your world begins to restrict, and you begin to lose those things that we work so hard to provide. And when you invest yourself in those things, Buttercup, then you will begin to see the reward of that life play forward. And so From that standpoint, when it's laziness, when it's just not interested, we have to teach our kids that life isn't all interesting. 50% of my life is not interesting. 50% of my life is just hard work. I hate mowing the lawn, but I certainly like walking through the lawn when it's mowed. There are so many illustrations from this standpoint. Why is math important? I can explain to you why math is important. There may be principles that you have to do in mathematics that you will never use again. But you know what? We're going to do them because it falls into the 50% category of things that just aren't interesting. And you can cry loud, you can cry soft, you can do whatever you got to do, but you figure out how to get it done, because until you get it done, there's not going to be the rewards of accomplishing that. Okay? I can do that in love, and I don't have to personalize this. I can stay completely removed. It doesn't bother me if you have to sit all night in your room and you don't experience the joy. Well, everybody else is going out for ice cream tonight and you don't get to. That doesn't really bother me, because these are the choices you're making now. Now, obviously, with a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, we're talking about a much different child than we're talking about when the hormones kick in and that need for independence starts to kick in, right? There's a place that 5th, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade into high school where we're transitioning them from being a little child where they're more dependent on us into an adult where they have no dependency on us. And so that's the place where we get stuck sometimes. So this for a 3-year-old, I don't think that you need to necessarily use these principles. This is more that student who's in the transition spot. They're old enough to kind of kick back and say, I'm not interested. I'm going to fight you on this. Well, you can fight me all you want. You're not really fighting me. This is life. This is what life looks like for the real world. And as we prepare you for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of your life, this is what it's going to look like if you make these choices. Okay, defiance and rebellion. These are character issues. The scripture is clear about the rebellious child, and we don't want our children to rebel. We don't want to live in a state of rebellion. Maybe I need to check myself. Do I exhibit rebellion against God in my own life? If I do, children are very smart. They will discern that, and I've made it acceptable to be rebellious. If I haven't, my child is just flat out being defiant in rebellion, well, again, be sure to pick up a copy of this book. And the second thing that I would say after reading about helping them know how to deal with their sin nature is that we begin to apply what happens in the real world. Now, in my home, if you exhibit a character issue, so if you lying, dishonesty is one of those things that is going to cost you dearly in your lifetime. That's a character issue. If you are rebellious and you flat out refuse to listen to what I've said, not you were just a little lazy and you didn't do a good job, were you flat out rebellious, where you just chose to do what you wanted versus what you knew I had wanted? Do you disrespect somebody harshly in a way that broke their spirit? Those types of character issues. If you're in my home and you do that while you're you're still in a school age student, you will write the book of Proverbs. All 31 chapters will be written. I just had a student write 31 chapters because he flat out refused to do what I had asked him to do. And so everything else in life stops, and he gets a notebook and his Bible, and he begins to write. And he will sit there and write as long as it takes. And sometimes it's taken them 2 weeks. And so everything else gets put on pause while they do that. Why do I do that? Number one, the Bible is alive and it's active. And you can't come in contact with the Bible without it beginning to have and bear fruit. I don't do it as punishment. The Proverbs was written to train young leaders. And if you are a fool and you're acting foolish, then I want to point you in the direction of wisdom, and you will begin writing from the book of Proverbs. My older students have all said to me that was one of the best things we did because, well, some of them wrote Proverbs maybe 5, 6, 7, or 8 times over the course of their academic careers. It left lasting fruit in their lives. The reason I make everything else stop is 10, 20, 30 years. If you exhibit rebellious behavior to a judge, to the U.S. government, to your boss, you will lose rights. Those rights will put a pause on everything else in life. If I choose to break the law, to drive at a high speed, to run over somebody, to do any of those things, the police are going to come. They're going to arrest me. They're going to take me and set me aside, and I'm going to lose my freedom. All life stops at that moment until I pay for that behavior. And so a lot of times too, the restriction somebody will feel would be there is no video games. There is no television. You know, when our family is together, you're going to be in your room. Well, everybody else over the summer, we've actually, one of our students had an entire summer's worth of loss of privilege. And you know what? I paid the price, because while the rest of the family went and did things with other families and stuff, I stayed at the house and we didn't have a fun summer. But you know what? That's the consequences of bad behavior. That's the consequences of rebellion. When we behave that way, our entire family suffers. If I rebel against God, my whole family suffers. And I need my children to understand that their behavior has the potential to destroy those around them. And so, yeah, so you're having to sit and write Proverbs, and maybe you're having to lose some consequences. We're all suffering because of your decision to be rebellious or to refuse this. And so I need you to understand that, because not for today. I got all the time in the world. What I need you to understand that for is because I need you to be a success 20, 30, or 40 years. I need to know that if I pass on today, that I'm going to see you again in eternity. And so everything I'm doing today has an eternal purpose. And I can stay in healthy brain when I approach it that way. Okay. So the defiance and rebellions, again, when the world gets very small, when as an adult, I choose to rebel. People don't trust me. People don't like me. People will punish me. I will end up in prison in a very small cell. And so that's one way. If there's a defiance, you begin addressing that just like what it would look like when they're 20 or 30 years. If it was not you and it was a police officer or a judge or a spouse, what does life look like when that behavior gets played forward? So that would be defiance. The last, well, okay, too hard. When things come easy, like we have a son who things just come easy for him, and all of a sudden he'll get a challenge that's a little difficult, and he's not used to that. I think we have to be careful with that. That's more of a motivation. That's a coaching place to teach them that if they can learn to work through the difficult things, they'll be even better than they are today. And Kristen does really well at this because she uses a strong encouragement. It is, I know this is difficult, but you're going to do it. And works through that process with them, kind of employing the best of how do we get through this, along with a little bit of, you got to do it or you're not going to get the rewards, because that's the way life works, combined with a big celebration when they do. We celebrate the win when they do. So that student's a little different than the one that's just flat out refusing or testing you or just being lazy. The last one that I would address would be a student that's just angry. And for us over the years, anger is a protective emotion. It generally is an emotion that helps us protect ourselves from a much more vulnerable emotion like hurt. And I think it's important sometimes not to respond to their anger with anger if it's a pattern and you kind of know it, but to look a little deeper as to what's causing the anger. So sometimes that offense can be perceived, or sometimes it can be a very real offense that happened to a student where all of a sudden they were a good student and then something has happened. Maybe there's some guilt or some shame that they're dealing with, or something has happened to them. Somebody did something to them or something along those lines, that it's good to just be curious about emotion, about anger especially, because anger almost never is related. Long anger is almost never related to what they're saying is making them angry. A lot of times there's underlying. And so as a parent, sometimes we've noticed all of a sudden behavior changes, and we see a very angry student or very angry in their interactions. And it's just good to start being curious about what's causing this. And sometimes it's helping them work through forgiveness, right? My perception of life is my reality. And it doesn't matter that I don't think it happened and they need to just get over it. Sometimes I actually need to walk through that process with them. And sometimes if there's been a very real offense, or something has happened to that student that compromised them in any way, I think we need to kind of time out what's causing the anger. We can deal with a lot of things, but is there something more going on? All right. Hopefully that makes sense and is helpful. Okay. So my motto has always been the Holy Spirit trumps everything I say. These are just some things. If we were talking in casual conversation, I would tell you we've learned over the last 25 years of parenting, 28 years of parenting, actually. And I definitely am not the same parent I was 28 years ago. And I definitely am a gentler, kinder, smarter, hopefully, parent than I was. And I'm proud to say that my children love the Lord, are serving the Lord, and doing well. But I also know that is God's amazing grace, because I am not a super parent. So, okay. Well, hopefully there was some tidbits that you could grab in there. Yeah, good. Be sure to pick this up. Use coupon code RESET. If it isn't there, I will be sure to post a link to the download of this book, and you can get it for free today. And then be sure to pick it up in the flash sale if you're interested in the physical copy. I think it's great with any book or any teaching. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. If there's something that really reaches out to you and the Holy Spirit uses to speak to you through, grab that. The parts that don't minister to you, that don't feel right, just throw it out. Don't take it. Be smart in the way we receive knowledge. Allow the Holy Spirit to teach us. So this book, be sure to pick up a copy of this book if you haven't. I know a number of you have read this. Sometimes it takes more. It's a very easy read because it's not big, but there is a lot in it. And be sure to comment for a chance to win 2,500 reward points. I got props going everywhere. Okay. Well, guys, it is awesome to serve this community. It is an honor to serve you and to participate in what God is doing in your family. We pray that the Lord will bless you, that he will give you wisdom, that he will give you insight to accomplish everything that he has for your family, for your children, and for your grandchildren and their children. That for generations, what you're sowing, the seed you are sowing today will bear fruit for generations. I said it in a post earlier this week, but how exciting it is to think that in your homes, you are raising up the Wesleys, the Billy Grahams, the leaders that will take on culture and will begin to influence culture for the kingdom of God. That excites me greater than anything else we do. And I cannot wait in eternity when I get to meet many of you in person, when I get to meet your children and their children, and to know that we were all part of this tribe that worked together to accomplish great things for the kingdom. So thank you, bless you, and we look forward to talking to you next week.